Welcome to ACD Combatives, your combatives and control tactics channel. Please like, subscribe, and share. Guys, Coach Kurt. So let's talk about being a good control tactics and combatives instructor. Also, that maybe correlates and translates to being a use of force instructor, but not nearly as much. Very different from being a martial arts instructor. And let me build a scenario for you. Not all control tactics instructors, law enforcement control tactics instructors, actual cops who are control tactics instructors, not martial artists who also classify themselves as combatives and control tactics instructors, law enforcement instructors, but people who are actually in the career field of law enforcement, who work for their agency and teach for their agency. Now, I have a martial arts background. I started training when I was 12. I've been doing that on and off since I was 12. I'm 52 by the time of this recording. I consider myself an average martial artist at best. I'm definitely not any kind of master. And we'll get more into that later. With my agency, what was required? Well, basically, we had a guy that was retiring. This was like 13 years ago. Well, it would have been more like 10 years ago because when I transferred to this agency, it was a couple years after that when he retired. But so let's say 10, 11 years ago, he retired and they say, hey, we need another instructor. Would you be interested? Well, I'm a martial artist, so I was interested. I went to an 80-hour course. Now, that 80-hour course gets refreshed every 5 years, and it's with a 40-hour course. Guys, it could be a 40-hour course, instructor's course, and then a 20-hour every 3 to 5 year refresher. It depends on your agency. It depends on the state, federal, whatever. It doesn't. All different jurisdictions have different requirements. You get the idea. So let's put yourself in that scenario. You've went through an 80-hour course, and every 5 years you do 40-hour refresher, but you are not a martial artist. How in God's green earth are you supposed to teach techniques? And we'll use my agency's curriculum as a example. Things that are required. I have to teach baton, pepper spray, taser, and then actual techniques. There's basic jiu-jitsu for the ground stuff, and the standing stuff resembles Krav Maga and some MMA stuff. Very basic on both ends. So if you're not a martial artist with a little bit of that kind of background, how are you supposed to teach control tactics and combatives? In short, you shouldn't. You shouldn't be teaching. If you don't train weekly in martial arts, something that's similar to or based on the same kind of stuff that you are required to teach to law enforcement officers for your agency, i.e. some kind of ground techniques, in some kind of standing techniques, then you probably shouldn't be teaching. A good example would be a firearms instructor who doesn't train firearms on their own. A firearms instructor doesn't have to be a master shootist and competition shooter like someone, let's say, Masad Ayub, but they should be pretty confident and competent and know how to teach firearms. This is what I'm talking about. If you teach control tactics, you should know what you're doing. Again, I don't consider myself any way, shape, or form a master martial artist by any stretch, but I know how to teach control tactics and combatives. What I see a lot of let me set this scenario, we get a lot of instructors who then, because they don't have the confidence to teach the control tactic skills or just don't know the techniques and don't feel confident showing them, do a lot of scenario training. Please don't get me wrong. I am a big fan of scenario-based training. Big fan. In fact, it's absolutely necessary and should be done in every session. It's the only way that I know of to successfully incorporate use of force concepts, de-escalation concepts, and so forth into your training. As long as the scenarios are realistic with a good point, not overcomplicated. You should be building in ways for the officers to transition between their tools, to see what kind of decisions they make, how they make the decisions. You get the idea. It's just a great way to show them the shortcomings of their knowledge of the law and their physical skill set, what have you. So I'm a huge fan of it. For example, in the scenario, you have to transition from different tools. Maybe you have to arrest a person. Maybe you don't have to arrest a person. Not every scenario should be, a fight or having to arrest somebody. Sometimes it's good just to see if the officer can make a decision based on the law and cite and release or warning or what have you. But this is control tactics. So a lot of times you will have a scenario where they have to fight. How do they create distance? How do they manage distance? How do they close distance? How do they transition to their different tools, pepper spray, baton, taser, what have you? What happens when they're on the ground, when handcuffing, and they have to use technique? This is what I'm talking about. You have to have good scenarios. I'm a huge fan of scenario-based training. But what we see a lot of, or what I see a lot of, is instructors then, because they don't feel comfortable teaching the actual control tactics and combative techniques, and just do a crud load of scenario-based training. Again, massive fan of it, thinks it absolutely should be part of our training curriculum, but it can't be the only thing you teach. It is a disservice to our students, our fellow officers, if all we do is give them part of the picture, in this case, just scenario-based training. So what do? Well, we have to add hours to the training. Like I said, my agency has 8 hours a year, 4-hour sessions, spring and fall. That's not nearly enough. That's what we should be fighting for. And if you do teach control tactics, then start training. And you can say, well, I don't have time. Well, then you probably shouldn't be teaching. And I understand that law enforcement officers have very challenging schedules. We work 50, 60 hours a week. We're shorthanded. And when we work odd shifts, a lot of times you get home at odd hours, and your martial arts schools out there in the community don't necessarily work often with your hours, but you got to try. Even if you can only go once a week to some local MMA gym, jiu-jitsu gym, Krav Maga school, what have you, something that relates in some way, shape, or form to what you're doing as an instructor. That's what I'm getting at. If you're not training once a week plus, then you shouldn't be teaching control tactics. Just like if you are not shooting on a regular basis and practicing your skills and going off to, getting professional instruction from shooting schools and instructors, you probably shouldn't be teaching firearms. Same difference. That being said, if you fail to teach techniques and have enough hours to train them, i.e. plenty of time each year to train these techniques, these individual officers are not going to have confidence in their skills. Lack of confidence equals issues with de-escalation. You want to get good de-escalation training for your officers. If they were all super confident in their physical ability to defend themselves and take care of themselves and use reasonable force to control somebody, if they know going into a situation that they're pretty competent, their confidence carries the contact. I don't know how many times I've been in contact with people and it could have went bad because I had confidence in my abilities. I was able to carry it without having to use too much force to hurt somebody. And I was able to de-escalate. De-escalate doesn't mean that you don't actually have to physically touch somebody to arrest them. De-escalation can also mean, and should also be understood as, being able to use objectively reasonable force to control somebody. And sometimes that means more force now equals less force later. I've done videos on that concept. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. Everybody like, subscribe, and share. And let me know what you think. Am I being too harsh? Maybe I am. But I think we owe it to our fellow officers to get it right. Anyway, everybody take care.
You can't handle the truth.
Let's roll. Hey, let's be careful out.